Canada's economy is under strain with new numbers today that show it slipped into a technical recession.
I'm just going to be very blunt because this is the fact. Mark Carney is now the only leader in the G7 to have plunged his economy into recession. He's been Prime Minister for 4 quarters now. The economy has shrunk in 3 of those quarters.
Canadians understand that the world is facing some headwind, but on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we have a plan. We have a plan to make generational investment in housing, in infrastructure, in productivity and innovation. We have a plan to support workers, Mr. Speaker, and we have a plan to support Canadians with affordability. On this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we're going to keep on working to build the strongest economy in the G7.
This news comes after more than a year of a trade war with the U.S. and a day after the Prime Minister pitched a new partnership with that same country.
We know that while Canada and the United States have had our differences over the centuries, we have always worked and eventually worked through them because we share values and our common interests run deep. Canada Strong will help make America great again.
But as the government pushes for better relationships abroad, here at home, it's up against a fracturing one as Alberta moves ahead with a vote on whether to have a binding referendum on separating from Canada. And despite standing together as Team Canada earlier this week, a meeting of the Western premiers came to a dramatic end. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith said she disagreed with a judge's decision to side with First Nations and toss a separatist petition. And Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew called her out for it.
I think that the court erred in judgment, and I think it's also anti-democratic, the decision that they made.
I think we know that is not correct, a lot of what you just said there, Premier Smith. It is not up to the petition gatherers to fulfill the duty to consult. It is up to you as the Alberta government. Why don't we hold off on this referendum talk for a year or two and see if we get these pipelines under construction?
Our party insiders are here. Greg McEachran is a former Liberal ministerial advisor. Fred Delory is a former Conservative campaign manager. Melanie Richer is a former communications director for the NDP. Greg, let's start with you and the economy. So kind of weak numbers last quarter. Seems we've slipped into a technical recession. Do you think this is a political liability? Are you worried about what you're seeing from StatsCan?
It's never good news. And having lived through a couple of recessions, yeah, absolutely not good news. The response today from folks like Desjardins, other places, and the interviews you've done thus far, leading off, Peter Armstrong, talked about what a surprise this was. That's not always a good sign. So you can't, even though I think the folks at Finance are saying, there are good things coming. Yeah, it's never a good sign. I think, though, if we're going to speak politically in addressing the clip that you showed of the Leader of the Opposition, and maybe my theme today will be communications, but they put out a media advisory to you and the rest of the press gallery that said it was a full-blown recession. So a month ago, if you were the leader of the Conservatives and you said what he said about Mark Carney, that he was badly educated, there was a huge blowback on that from a lot of his own folks. So today, you start off by saying, that this is a full-blown recession when it's not. And, I watched his media availability. You shouldn't smile or look like you're happy or laugh when there is a fiscal issue that's going to affect all Canadians going on. I think that was a bad look. So I don't think he helped himself today, and that probably gave the government some leeway or some time that as the day went on, the actual financial experts, the people who know what they're talking about, were able to comment. And so far you had, Peter Armstrong and someone from the Chamber of Commerce that has given me personally a little bit of, I'm not going to, thinking that we're completely in the clear. There's a lot of government spending still that's not out the door. And I think you hear that from the Prime Minister. He's really tied military and energy together. And, that is what you and the ambassador from Germany talked about. Yep. So fingers crossed and being very hopeful.
Yeah, Fred, what do you make of what Poilievre said on that? I mean, he also had a kind of a prescription for what's ailing the Canadian economy, right? He says he wants to get rid of the industrial carbon tax. He's going back to that, of course. Get rid of the anti-energy laws, blaming the deficit, saying that that's maybe why we're seeing some of the the ugly job numbers, the slumping GDP. Economists are not necessarily aligned with him on that, but certainly he pounced on this today, feeling like maybe it's an opening for him, right?
Yeah, and it is an opening if it's prolonged, if we're into a series of recessions or a prolonged recession if this goes a long time. But if we're out this month, or if we were out last month and don't know it yet, it kind of loses its oomph. But I see, he pivoted to his main message about the industrial carbon tax, so it's an opportunity, a political opportunity to do that. But again, if it's not prolonged, if the recession is, if we come out of this quickly, does that mean Carney was right? Does that mean Carney's, whatever he's been doing, making announcements, does that get us out of the recession? We have a long game to play. We have 3 years potentially to the next election. So how the economy ebbs and flows is going to, I think, will dictate how a lot of the political parties message on it. But you have to be consistent in where you go at it. And until people are really, really hurting, I don't think it's a political vulnerability yet. Again, if we are in the prolonged recession, that's when the game can change.
Mel, what do you make of those numbers? Obviously not great, but could be worse. But what was interesting to me when we were having the conversation with the Business Council is they're saying if we get a deal on the CUSMA agreement, we could maybe come out of this right away. Like, essentially, that's what's dragging us down. No deal with the Americans. We heard the Prime Minister kind of pivot in his messaging yesterday, saying we're open to deeper integration on these things. Let's make America great again. Do you think that maybe gives some impetus to Carney to, put more resources into brokering a deal with the Americans, maybe spend more time and energy on that, given that that's kind of what's holding us back right now economically?
Right. And I think most Canadians are really well attuned to that, the fact that we are where we are because of what's happening in the States and with President Trump. But because of that, I also think that folks are still giving the Prime Minister a lot of leeway. So to your point, as an impetus, absolutely. These numbers aren't good. The reaction that you would hope opposition leaders to have is, what Greg's reaction was, this is really troubling numbers. I'm hopeful to hear that it may not be super bad, but to kind of try to celebrate, I hear you, it's an opening, totally, but I think it's more an opening of this is really concerning, and this may mean that the things he's talking about are not translating into things to help Canadians, and we're going to keep our foot on the gas and make sure that he's actually delivering for people, instead of coming out and seemingly a little bit happy or finding a way to try to attack Mark Carney personally, which, again, when people had the choice of who they trusted with the economy, was it Mark Carney or Pierre Poilievre? They chose Mark Carney, and they're still choosing him. So it seems to me like a losing argument for Pierre Poilievre. But I do think, to Fred's point of if things continue to go bad, the case for Mark Carney to get a deal, the case has always been there, but that pressure of when people start turning against what you think is right because they don't see that translate into anything for them, then that absolutely changes the game for Mark Carney, because people go from I'm not sure this is the right approach, but I'm willing to trust you that you know what you're doing, to I'm no longer trusting that you know what you're doing. And that's the really dangerous place for the Prime Minister. And also, I would say for us right now in this moment of instability as we're dealing with the U.S., because we know that, a fractured Canada or a Canada that's not going so well is to the benefit of that administration.
Greg, what did you make of the Prime Minister saying yesterday he wants a strong Canada to help make America great again? It's kind of echoing what he said at Canada 2020 a couple weeks ago, saying we want deeper integration, we want a fortress North America. He's not necessarily, although he did mention a rupture yesterday, but he's not kind of, he's signaling that maybe there's a tonal shift underway here, right? That maybe they're trying to open themselves up a bit to Trump and the administration and getting to CUSMA by July 1st or maybe shortly thereafter.
Well, if he's signaling that, I'm not sure a lot of people who know for sure and have confirmed that. And that's on the press side, and that's on, I dare say, a lot of staff and elected members. Again, on the theme of communications, in a good PMO, I see a chief of staff, a principal secretary, and a director of communications. And that's kind of like, for lack of a bit inelegant term, but a three-headed beast. I think Stephen Harper ran his office that way. I think Jean Chrétien did. They also cycled through chiefs and directors of communication. And so you had people who had fresh ideas, fresh approaches. I find a lot of the communications from this PMO very similar to the last PMO. And you're not elevating people to be in communications jobs where they can be entrepreneurial. And what I mean by that is, knowing that who in the press covers tax stories or trade stories, and making sure that you're building those relationships. Because Justin Trudeau was very popular for a long time, and then he wasn't. And Pierre Poilievre was very popular for a long time, and then he wasn't. So when you are making hay and the sun is shining, you've got to put something away for the days where the sun isn't shining. And I can speculate on what the Prime Minister meant, but I in terms of energy and I can trace the announcement, I can see the spending, but on this one, I'm not really sure.
Yeah, Fred, were you taken aback by that Make America Great reference? I mean, I get what he's saying. It's that, like, we can give them energy, we can supply LNG, we've got lots of oil for them, we can help them with their energy crisis as artificial intelligence is turbocharged and they're dealing with a shortage of energy. Like, it makes sense. But rhetorically, I perked up, right? I mean, that was the headline of my story yesterday. Yeah. That was the lead of my file. Like, that was something I was like, oh, interesting. Like, is he making a play here for Trump? Like, something that stuck out to me, at least.
Yeah, look, I was surprised when we came in here today and Greg was not wearing a Canada Strong to Make America Great Again hat. I thought that would be
in the mail
next week.
I don't have that much hair, and so I want to keep what I have in place.
But yeah, look, it's clearly he's playing right into Trump's message, and it is very different than the rupture message in Davos a few months ago. But the undercurrent of it, if you look at what he's talking about, this is an opportunity to, again, myself staying consistent here, they're our largest trading partner by far. We need a working relationship with the United States. Yes, we need to diversify our trade and do these other things, but we still need to make something work here. And Ambassador Hoekstra pushed out and said, this is what we like to hear.
Yeah.
So it is a good message that seems to be working in the right way. The risk is, the political risk, it does send a mixed message if you don't quite understand what he's saying, where, again, rupture one time and now Make America Great Again and the other. That's there's risk to that, but I'm not saying it's a great one.
Mel, one smart person once told me only Ronald Reagan could negotiate with the communists because no one thought Ronald Reagan was a communist, right? Like, he was able to do something with the Soviet Union that other leaders before him couldn't. And maybe that's the same with Mark Carney. No one thinks that he's in Donald Trump's pocket, right? No one thinks that he's going to kowtow to Trump. I mean, rightly or wrongly, that's what they think.
Right.
What do you make of what he said and kind of going out on a limb there to extend an olive branch? I mean, it's attracted the ambassador, who doesn't have a lot of good things to say about Canada normally, saying, hey, I like what I'm hearing.
Yeah, living in a perhaps wrong country for, not having a lot of good feelings about Canada, but maybe a conversation for another time. I thought it was interesting. I guess the question is, stay tuned to what that looks like. He's obviously in the U.S. making a pitch to Americans about working more closely with Canada. Now, very, very different and maybe a little bit antagonistic, but I can't help but think of, the video that Doug Sorry, Fred. Doug Ford put out, Mons, you're saying, all right, it is Friday, that Doug Ford put out talking directly to Americans, and, the administration thought it was cute until they didn't think it was cute. So I'd be interested to see how that plays out. But I think the difference of Mark Carney's messaging these days as it relates to the U.S., yes, he's doing those other things internationally, but now he's having to explain to Canadians why we're seeing progress, or why Mexico is seeing progress with the United States as it relates to CUSMA, and we're not. And I think that is the changing thing, that it just looks like they're way more ahead. And I think folks are asking themselves, why are we not? What conversations aren't happening behind the scenes for that to happen? So I think that was the interesting, maybe, things that have been happening as late that I thought maybe is why, he made that pitch to folks in New York.
Yeah, Greg, to that point, I mean, the Mexico-U.S. talks, at least the first round wrapped up today. They've announced more dates for June in Washington, another date in Mexico City in July. I mean, we don't know if they're making any progress, but they're certainly talking to the Mexicans, the Americans right now. They're not talking to us. Do you think that that's tenable? I mean, at some point, do they have to come up with some dates? Do they have to show they're willing to sit down with the Americans? We know LeBlanc, the minister responsible for this file, is going to Washington next week, potentially. That's still not yet confirmed, but it sounds like it's going to happen. do they have to show that some things are moving, that there's progress, that like things are in the works, or can they just sit back and let it kind of play out and maybe pounce at the last minute like they did with NAFTA and just sign on to what Mexico's brokered? Like, what do you think their strategy should be, really?
Well, I think Fred and Mel have kind of hinted at this, that Canadians are being very patient, and at some point, what is going to make them impatient? If they're still paying attention to Donald Trump, I mean, there was a cabinet secretary who in April criticized Prime Minister Carney very publicly at an event for dealing with China, and then a month later, his president goes to China. So it is really hard. Imagine what it's like, you know, for those that are in the middle of it to know, you know, when Donald Trump says a deadline, you know, there's a whole meme about taco around this. So how are you doing that? And if the Canadian people start to say, okay, well, we know about that, we're familiar with that, that doesn't matter anymore, that's when the government might be in need to sort of change tactics. But, you know, what I would have liked to have seen in terms of the Make America Great Again line is I would have been reminding folks that there are people in the business community that are very happy that the Prime Minister has started to work with India, started to work with China. And you mentioned Ronald Reagan. The old line about Nixon was only Nixon could go to China because he had that kind of power within the Republican base. Well, you know, Mark Carney thus far has had that type of power where Canadians will say, yeah, okay, you know, times are really tough. We're not very, you know, we were very unhappy with a couple of countries for different reasons, but we can see because of current circumstances why you're talking to them. But this is where having, you know, you're listening to your caucus, depending on what you're doing in terms of public policy research, the government is going to have to know that to get out in front of it. And I feel like if we're not quite sure why the Prime Minister said those words, that, you know, like unless there's a major interview or a column this weekend that explains all, we're still kind of scratching our head about it.
Fred, can we pivot to talk about Alberta sovereignty for a minute? Because the Prime Minister was also kind of provocative on that issue as well this week. You know, he's more forceful in what he was saying to Alberta Premier Daniel Smith for triggering this referendum, saying the question she's posing to have a potential, you know, the question on whether there should be a second referendum on separation is a dangerous bluff. He said, you know, it's not a good idea to have a referendum on this. It's fracturing the country. You know, we heard him last week on it. It was a bit subdued this week. He's kind of digging in a bit more, you know, kind of calling her out, saying, what are you doing here? You know, like, we're brokering this MOU. We're going to get a potential pipeline. Like, why are you doing it? Do you think that maybe he took the weekend last week to think about how he's approaching this issue and decided maybe I need to say a little more?
Well, I think it got more real once she actually came out with what the question was, and I think that's what forced everyone to react more strongly the way they are. And to, you know, we talked about the economy at the start of the segment here. Nothing hurts an economy more than uncertainty, and that's what we've just. That has just majorly entered the equation in Canada. We've, you know, after 10 years of a government chasing investment out of the country, we're at a time in a period where we've got a Prime Minister that seems to be very focused on bringing it in. And this introduces a real risk to investors, for global investors. And it's going to be problematic until it's done. And to take this risk, and to his point, like, this is a big risk now. Like, we're all, you know, I think we all feel good that Albertans will choose to say no to this referendum, to advance into the next stage. But campaigns matter. Campaigns take on a life of their own. We don't know who the real players are yet on the separation side. There could be someone with talent that steps up and motivates and gets people fired up. We haven't seen that yet, but it could happen, and it'd be a risk.
And they're at 30-35% in polls in support for separation rate. It's not nothing.
Right.
It's not 10-15.
That's where Quebec was before some of their referendums that came dangerously close to destroying the country.
It's not zero, right? Mel, what are your thoughts on this? The Prime Minister's rhetoric, what the Premier said this week, her sparring with Wab Kinew, that was an interesting moment. Give me your thoughts on this whole thing this week.
Maybe I'll tackle the Premier Smith and Wab Kinew. You know, when we first heard Premier Smith say that they were going to contest the decision from the courts, I think everybody kind of went like, oh, I don't know that, you know, this is necessary for you to be doing. It's already being appealed. Why are you, you know, participating in this? And at the time, her talking about you only ever need to consult when you're building a project. And I think a lot of folks were really uncomfortable with that explanation. Whether or not, I was able to vocalize why that was uncomfortable, it just felt like everything that we've been doing to advance, reconciliation is like, that's maybe not it. So to hear Premier Carney this week very eloquently and reasonably, because, one of the strengths of Premier Smith is she sometimes says what I consider crazy things in a real reasonable way where it's hard to not take her at that. Premier Carney is another person who is very reasonable and pragmatic in the way that he talks. So his ability to say with a lot of authority of why actually she was wrong, I think folks from across the country, in Alberta or not, were really glad to see that somebody with that not just ability to speak, truth to Premier Smith in front of her, but to have the chutzpah to do that, right?
Yeah.
At that table, and to say it takes
in public setting like that, after just having what was seemingly a good meeting.
Exactly. So I think a lot of folks were proud to see Premier Carney do that, and I think it was important because for folks who, maybe listening to Premier Smith and taking her at her word, I think it was an important clarification of what exactly duty to consult is and what those rights are. So I was among many people, I think, really proud to see that correction happen on that important stage.
Greg?
I saw a story just breaking as we were coming in from the Toronto Star that Pierre Poilievre, even though he's an MP from Alberta, can't vote because it may be something to do with residency. So last week he was having a pretty good week by saying he was going to jump in on this.
Yeah.
So again, going back to communications, that's something that you might have wanted to think about, in terms of what kind of footprint you have in the riding that you're representing. I mentioned last week about how diminished I feel Premier Smith looks, and this week she was, the party president of her own party was offside and said her party was probably mostly behind separating, and she had to correct him. The base of her party has said we want a leadership review. So all these things have happened, and another point I made last week was, somebody runs. They're a municipal councillor, they run federally, and all of a sudden they walk into the clothesline because they're not ready for the different level of scrutiny. And I really feel that Premier Smith has been used to a certain type of press conference or doing a video statement without questions. And it sounded like Premier Carney had said this to her privately, and then she repeated it, and he corrected her. And I don't think she was ready for that. And I think, if you are you feel very safe in your own backyard, even though she could still be in Alberta, this issue is one of our country, and it has elevated it. And she has a tougher standard to live up to here in the way she communicates. And I think a lot of people were very happy with Premier Carney calling her out on this.
Fred, final word on this thought?
Well, just the whole setup was interesting, where you have all the Western premiers together in a press conference and having very different views on the matter. So, it's a very different back and forth that is unusual to see.
I spoke to the Yukon Premier, who was there as well, and we'll hear his thoughts to how that all went down. He was just sitting there kind of watching it all play out. Kind of interesting for him. So on top of everything happening in federal politics, there will be a number of by-elections coming up. 5 MPs have said they will be resigning their seats. Stephen Guilbeault, Jonathan Wilkinson, and Nathaniel Erskine-Smith from the Liberals, Alexandre Boulris from the NDP, and Simon-Pierre Savard-Tremblay from the Bloc Québécois. Both Boulris and Savard-Tremblay are currently sitting as independents, both with plans to run provincially in Quebec. That means these 5 ridings will soon be up for grabs. 3 of them in Quebec, 1 in British Columbia, and 1 in Ontario. Mel, talk to me about this. I mean, there's like a by-election palooza coming up. And it's kind of like we just went through one a few months back, right? And now we're here again. And the majority government, not necessarily in doubt, but potentially some seats could flip. Do you expect there to be movement? Do you think, maybe talk to me about Quebec in particular.
Yeah, for sure. That
could be where some of the action is, because we got 3 ridings up for grabs there. Guilbeault is interesting to me in particular, given that he just flamed out this week over energy and climate and all that. Speak to me about that.
Yeah, it was funny. I had to correct a few coworkers this week who maybe weren't a big fan of Guilbeault for different reasons or different maybe provinces they lived in across the country, and kind of talked about how he wasn't a very popular minister. And I had to correct them and say, you know, he may not have been popular with some of the premiers, but that guy is popular in Montreal. That person is popular with climate activists. And despite still having, you know, been part of some decisions that people who really care about the environment questioned and didn't know were totally the right approach, still lent him so much credibility, and still, you know, in their messages of thanks to him when he left, still gave him the credibility of who he is as an activist and in his role as minister. So I think it's a big mistake to think that that is not going to be harmful for the Prime Minister in places like Montreal, but also in places like Vancouver and Toronto and Halifax, where his name was routinely brought up to, you know, NDP campaigns in the last few years to talk about how the Liberals had credibility on the environment because of him being in caucus. So I think the job for the Prime Minister, you know, if I was advising him, would be to walk a very careful dance. And I don't know that, you know, life happens as a comment to Guilbeault. Stepping away is the way to do that. So Quebec in particular is going to be super fascinating. Obviously, Guilbeault's riding, before it was Guilbeault's riding, it was an NDP riding, and before that it was a Bloc riding. I would expect that this could be an opportunity for people who really liked Stephen Guilbeault, who are really big proponents of fighting the climate crisis, could send a message to the Prime Minister in this riding. I think the other ridings in Quebec, I'm forgetting.
I just read them off. I've forgotten as well.
No, there's La Petite Patrie with Alexandre.
Yes.
I think that
the
you know,
Bloc riding. No, I can't remember what it's called.
It used to be Brigitte Sans Souci. I know who used to have.
We know the people. We can't remember the long names.
I can't remember the riding name.
Yeah.
So that too, you know, was historically always the Bloc. Went NDP, I think, from 2011 to 2019, and then went back to the Bloc. So I think that's probably a safe Bloc riding. Merci. It's literally right beside where I grew up. I'm from Cornwall. It's the riding right next door, which is so silly. My cottage is like right by the border. But anyway, I'm going to get in trouble for that later. So I think it's still safe to say that that's a safe Bloc Québécois seat. I think Alexandre's is really interesting. I think in good times that could go red. Following Stephen Guilbeault's resignation, I don't know that goes red. Maybe it goes Bloc. And I think that could have probably been a three-way race. But that was I'm a big fan of Alexandre. That was an Alexandre riding. Once it became an Alexandre riding, obviously it was a Jack Layton riding at first, but then it became an Alexandre riding, and he was, you know, Team Quebec for a long time. So he, it's going to be a miss for the NDP in that one.
Greg, I'm looking at Laurier Ste. Marie, the numbers. So Guilbeault got 52% last time, the NDP 18.8. So, I mean, he really crushed it in that last election. In theory, this should stay Liberal. Are you worried? Are you concerned? Or do you think, no, with margins like that, given what we've seen in the national polling numbers, also in Quebec, Carney's doing really well, right? Like he has some strength there. Do you think he holds on to Laurier Ste. Marie, potentially maybe picks up Rosemont Petite Patrie? Like, what is the call there?
You know, candidate choice is going to be really crucial here. And the Prime Minister has shown, there was a provincial New Democrat from Ontario who ran federally as a Liberal recently and won. There have been Conservatives who have crossed the floor to the Liberals. So, you know, right candidate, right constituency, right campaign, they can absolutely do that.
Did you notice there how he didn't answer the question and just decided to take shots at Fred and I instead?
I would just jump in and say a red mailbox is going to win this ride.
You think Laurier Ste. Marie?
Yes. Yeah. The Liberals are going to win this big. The environment, yes, big issue at times. Right now in the polling across the country is off the map. People are not worried about it. I'm not saying they shouldn't be, but they are not.
In that riding?
Across the board. It is not
It's just dropped down, right? I don't even know if it's in the top 5.
It's not top 10. Like the economy is, and jobs and affordability is where everyone is hyper-focused. Again, I'm not saying they shouldn't be. I'm not saying it's not something that Canadians should be concerned about, but they're not.
Or are you playing the expectations game where you're like raising expectations for the Liberals?
I spit facts here. That's it.
What about for the Conservatives, Fred? I mean, these are not.
These are all safe seats,
Yeah.
except for Alexandre Belarus is the only seat that I think is going to switch sides. The NDP are going to lose that to the Bloc. That's it. That's the only switch happening here.
Yeah, I mean, there's no. I mean, we saw the Conservatives kind of underperform right in the last by-elections. Do they have to put up anything?
These are all safe seats for all the
matter,
parties.
Right?
Again, they're not in these. These are not. These are people that won by big margins last election.
Fair enough. All right, let's leave it there. Thank you so much to the Friday Political Pulse panel: Fred Delory, Melanie Richer, and Greg McEachran.